There's a level of courage required to put yourself out there. What are some of the things that maybe women tend to fear that they probably shouldn't?
I think a lot of women fear being critiqued. Am I the right person? Am I the right expert? They're worried how they look. Because I've never had a man being told, oh, your beard looked too white. There's always that constant self-doubt and fear of making mistakes.
And I feel that comes from the conditioning of our childhood. And you understand why women would be sensitive when something is said about them and boys would just shrug off.
Women tend to be judged very harshly.
Why is society so judgmental to women?
Sometimes as humans, when we say show up authentically, we don't mean it. And for those who show up authentically, as they are, they're judged.
It is because of the patriarchal nature, right?
Just having that mentality that once you become aware of this and you're learning, and it doesn't mean you're an expert in X and X. I've spoken at the UN General Assembly, and I remember that night I couldn't even sleep.
Do it afraid.
Yes.
Do it afraid.
Absolutely.
Do it anyway.
Practice makes progress.
It gets easier with time. The more you do it, the easier it becomes.
It's a continuous learning. You will always learn.
We are the stories we tell ourselves. What's the constant story you tell yourself about yourself?
Can't be what you can't see.
The books you read, social media, the music you listen to, is it uplifting or does it make you feel more depressed? If you're constantly listening to people who trash talk women, you will start trash talking women.
You need to keep imbibing on knowledge, and then you disseminate that knowledge.
You feed yourself, you become.
Interact with industry experts. Surround yourself with people who add on.
That is what women should be thinking. I need to be there. Why am I not there?
It is time to reimagine leadership. My name is Ben Owden, and I would like to welcome you to a series of conversations in partnership with Women Lift Health around how can we develop new approaches to the new challenges that leaders face in the 21st century. Greetings to you. I hope you are doing well and are having a meaningful and productive day. Welcome to another episode of the Why Lead podcast, and I'm your host, Ben Owden. In partnership and collaboration with Women Lift Health, we're having a series of conversations around reimagining leadership. The world is changing. A lot of new challenges are coming up when we think about diversity, AI, so many things happening, challenges that we've never had to deal with before. And all these challenges require new approaches to address them. And so we've been having a series of conversation, and in our conversation today, we'll be talking and exploring strategies for increasing coverage for women's voices in healthcare and exploring the reasons behind the underrepresentation of women's stories and voices in health media coverage. And so to have this conversation, I am joined by a seasoned journalist, a media consultant who blends her expertise in storytelling, digital media, and ethics to shape narratives and empower voices across Africa. With a wealth of experience moderating panels, training communication professionals, and sharing the esteemed annual Journalism Excellence Awards, her impact extends beyond borders. Her editorial prowess, honed through roles at the Africa Report, Citizen TV, and the Nation Media Group, underscores her commitment to excellence in journalism, and through her versatile skill set, Rachel continues to elevate standards in media and communication. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel Ombaka. Rachel, karibu sana.
Thank you so much.
And with her, we're joined by a strategic communications, advocacy, and policy specialist with extensive experience gained within several roles in the public, private, and international development sectors, spanning over 16 years. In her current role at Women Lift Health, she leads and implements Women Lift Health communications and engagement strategy across the world with an initial focus in Africa, South Asia, and North America. She has received a myriad of awards and recognitions throughout her tenure. And in August 2020, this was an interesting part of your profile, she self-published and released her first book about youth and leadership titled Youth Can, an anthology of powerful and inspiring stories from youth breaking barriers across 22 African countries. Ladies and gentlemen, Lizz and Ntonjira. Lizz, karibu sana.
Happy to be here.
I think when we talk about visibility, there's a level of courage required to put yourself out there. And there is a quote that says, courage sometimes begins with knowing what not to fear. So I think when we talk about visibility and personal branding and putting yourself out there, what are some of the things that maybe women tend to fear about the realities of putting yourself out there, of being visible, that they probably shouldn't?
I could start. I think a lot of women fear being critiqued. They fear that a lot. With my experience engaging with a lot of young women and senior women leaders, a lot of them have this amazing wealth of wisdom. And I'm talking to them and wondering, why don't people know about you? Why aren't you telling people about this amazing project that you're working on, about this impact you've had in your community? And they're like, I just don't want to be critiqued. The other thing is they feel like they're bragging, but they're not, right? They're like, no, I'm just humble. But when you talk about what you're doing, I think sometimes people forget how inspired people get and how empowered they get. So it's, for me, there are many, many factors, I think, but those two for me stand out. Just being critiqued because women are judged harshly, especially with the advent of new media, where there's social media, just a wrong, maybe picture capture, and you're trending the next day, something maybe you said, they're worried how they look. Because I've never had a man being told, oh, your beard looked too white, or your eyebrows were not matching, or your color was...
Yeah, you have gray hair, it's called salt and pepper, right?
Oh, yeah.
It has another word as well.
It has a name. Silver fox. Thank you.
Yeah, so women tend to be judged very harshly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things that stand out for me. Maybe for Rachel, it's different.
It's the same. And you've actually said what I was going to say. And then as you're speaking, what is coming to mind is the unconsciousness of it. And I feel that comes from the conditioning of our childhood. Because in the home, for example, I'll speak about my son. He had some kind of skin disease. And I thought, as a mother, that he would not want to go to school because he would be judged, he'd be asked questions. But to him, it didn't matter, He was like, yeah, so what? But I have a teenage girl. My boy is 6 and I have a teenage girl. But for my girl, when she had the first pimple on her face, she didn't want to go to school. So you can already see from the home setting how it builds. And then that now crops into the work setting. And you understand why women would be sensitive when something is said about them, and boys would just shrug off, you know what I mean? And also to the point that Lizz was talking about in terms of why is society so judgmental to women? It is because of the patriarchal nature, right? Where we still have, even in the African countries that we deem to have moved, have progressed more than others, you still have this patriarchal nature where you think that I should be at home. The woman should be at home. Even those who will be listening to my podcast now, I don't know what your audience looks like, but a lot of the voices we expect to hear that are on platforms, we expect them to be male voices. And this has also been my personal experience when fighting sexual harassment in the newsroom, which I'll get to at a later time. When I tried to speak about it, I wasn't listened to. But when a man who I approached spoke about it, they listened to him. Right? So there are a lot of intricacies and they're all interconnected in terms of what happens in the home, what happens in the society, and how it ends up being practiced within the workplace. Yeah.
And there's also the fear of making mistakes.
Oh,
I just remembered.
Yes.
There's always the fear of making mistakes, and it's coupled with sometimes imposter syndrome.
100%.
Like, am I the right person? Am I the right expert? We're always... women are always self-doubting. Like, I think there's somebody else who is more knowledgeable in this area, but there's always that constant self-doubt and fear of making mistakes. And what I always say, even when I'm giving public speaking classes, practice makes progress. There's nobody who is born today and can speak to a crowd. You will shake the first time, the second time. I remember in the newsroom, like the first bulletin I did, I was, hello, good evening, and welcome. And sometimes there's like a dozen things going through your mind, but you become so good at it. You can be woken up, hey, breaking news, and you're like, I can do this. Practice makes progress.
Yeah. And I think maybe just to piggyback on what you just said there, right? How did the two of you, I guess, overcome that imposter syndrome and the fear of making mistakes? Because I think if you've lived long enough, you realize everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
And it never stops.
No, it doesn't.
It never stops at any level of your life,
Absolutely.
right? But yet some of us judge ourselves through the mistakes we make.
Yeah.
And we've put this expectation that I have to show up perfectly all the time.
Yeah.
So how do people in general, but I think more specifically women, how do they overcome that fear of making mistake?
I don't know if I should let Rachel go first, because I struggle with imposter syndrome, because I think I suffer from something opposite. Like when there's a meeting, I'm like, but why am I not there? And I don't know what that is called. So I'll let you go first.
Okay.
The imposter syndrome.
She's
Yes.
flipped it. She's actually flipped it. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, what you've said there is something that I've recently spoke about. I was invited to speak at an event, and I was telling people that I have a belonging syndrome, where I feel like I do belong, right? And I was sharing a story of how, for me, that was instilled in me by my mother. I remember in school, if I got a bad grade, she'd be like, probably the teacher's the one who made a mistake here. Can we go and check, right? And so I never was constantly put to question whether or not I'm supposed to succeed, whether or not I'm supposed to be in this space. It was always that you're not a victim, you're a victor, and you do belong where you are. So I call it the belonging syndrome. But let's hear about this imposter syndrome.
Yeah, and I think your mom should have been this part of this conversation if she's still alive.
She is.
Yeah, because I think, coming to think of it, that's a good problem to have. And me saying that Liz has flipped the script, that is what women should be thinking. I need to be there. Why am I not there? Right? But because of how we are brought up, now you think the opposite. I'm not good enough. And to be honest, I struggle with that. I am a panel speaker. I moderate panels. I speak on, TV shows and stuff like that. But you'll find that the night before, I won't be able to sleep. And in the morning, my stomach will be running. So I don't think, in my own experience, that you do ever get over the imposter syndrome. But having said that, I think it gets easier with time. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And you asked, how do you then make it easier for you to deal with? I am intentional about the women I surround myself with. If you hang around me, if you look at my social media profiles, you will see that the people that I hang around with are either doing better than me in the spaces that we occupy, right? Or they're more exposed than I am, such that whatever they're doing and how they're speaking, they seem to be at a level where I want to be at. So I've realized that for me to improve, I need to be with those who are doing it either better than I am or in a different way that can add value to how I do it. Another thing that contributed to, I would say, the confidence that I have, because I think I'm a very confident person, is the male allies that I have. And the person that comes to mind is my boss. When I was at Nation Media Group, I had a male boss, but he was all about work. Is your work okay? Have you handed in this story? Why are you late? You know what I mean? Work. But when I went to Citizen, I had a boss who was like, okay, Rachel, I've been invited to this meeting, this panel, but I want you to go instead. Every single time he would push me to go.
Sponsorship.
Exactly. Yes. And in hindsight, I am now seeing what he was doing. He saw that I could do it. And because he knew I would say no, he would, use his authority to say, Rachel, go and do this. And from there, that is how I've, become who I am today. So I think there are people who play specific roles and can build up your confidence such that even when that imposter syndrome comes, you keep remembering, but this person,
If they see it in me.
Exactly. Then who am I to doubt that I can do it? Yeah.
And I think also what complements that and everything you've said is also being aware. I feel like we're all in a constant state of becoming.
Yes.
I don't think anyone, maybe there are people who reach self-actualization, but I know that I feel like every phase of my life, I'm in a state of becoming because I'm learning new things, I'm learning other things, I'm gaining new knowledge, things have evolved, etc. And I think once you become aware of this and you're learning, and it doesn't mean you're an expert in X and X, I don't want to know more about that. I'm always trying to learn. There's nothing, just having that mentality that, let me use comms for instance. We always say photography or Final Cut editing there's an editor. I'm always curious. I think that's the thing. Always been curious about the things that you will interact with in future or in the near future, or where you are predispositioned at the moment. For me, that really helps a lot. I think what also helps is watch, like, there's so many times I am just on YouTube and I'm watching TED Talks. I think whoever came up with TED Talks was brilliant.
Yeah.
Was it called TED? Sorry. I don't know why they're called TED Talks, but I think they're brilliant because there's no topic that you can search you don't find that somebody has contributed to it. And you watch how they speak, how they the different things that they do, how, if you're struggling with public speaking, there are different, so many videos you can watch. There are people who've been vulnerable about it, how they've improved. You practice. I practice in front of the mirror. Like what Rachel was saying resonated so well when she was saying you speak in panels. I've spoken at the UN General Assembly, and I remember that night I couldn't even sleep, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I have to. But I don't like memorizing a lot, because if I forget one sentence,
everything.
Exactly.
But I think it's a continuous learning. You will always learn, interact with industry experts, surround yourself with people who add on. Yeah.
Can I just add, Ben? Do it afraid.
Yes.
Do
Do
it
it
afraid.
anyway.
Do it anyway. You know? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, based on what you guys have said there, right? There's this, I think we are the stories we tell ourselves more often than what people tell us. People can tell you anything, but it's like, what's the constant story you tell yourself about yourself, right? But many of us, and I think this is also true for a lot of women as well, is most people have an unreliable narrator in their mind. That's constantly telling you things that maybe you aren't or you can't do, right? So it doesn't matter whether or not what the competence people see in you. Like, for example, the way you responded to the challenges that were thrown your way means something in you must have believed that, you know what, I can pull this off, right? But there are people who are crippled by that unreliable narrator. So how do we, I guess, and how do women get to a point where they, like I say, maybe the narrator will never disappear. But how do we develop the courage and the discernment to ignore that, and maybe to find a way to feed in new, different narrator?
To drown the noises. Even my friends know. I don't like surrounding myself with negative energy. If you don't like a job or the environment there, I can tolerate you talking about it for a few times. But if you're not going to do something about it, miss me with that.
Exactly.
Like, I don't want to hear it. If you're in a bad relationship and you keep talking about it, like, you have to be doing something towards changing that situation. And I think that's really important, because what you feed yourself, what you surround yourself, what Rachel was saying, even the people you keep around you, people impact us. Like, I really believe in people's energies, like the chi, whatever it's called. There are people who just make you feel great and you just love their energy. And there are times you even have free time and you're thinking, somebody called you and you're like, no, I don't need that energy around me, right? I think it's really important what you feed your mind, the people who you surround yourself with, and what you're saying, what you tell yourself. I always tell myself, I can. And I think that's what led to the birth of Youth Can, because at a very young age, I sat in so many meetings. I was very lucky, privileged, and really humbled to sit in, senior leadership positions at a very young age, where I constantly would hear, this is a microwave generation. And the constant bashing was in women and young people in general, both male and female. And I was like, no, they're young people doing amazing things. And that's what led to the birth of that book, because I wanted to show the peers, the other young people, the older generations across different industries. There are people shattering those glass ceilings. There are people doing immaculately innovative things in this Africa. And I didn't want people to think, oh, Kenyans are very innovative. Maybe it's a Kenyan thing. No. And that's why it featured 22 different African countries. Anglophone, Lusophone, Francophone. The youngest featured is only 6 years old, to also showcase to people that impact can start at any age. And the oldest then was our very own Professor Bitangen Demo, such a male ally, who was then 60, to show also people that we stand on the shoulders of giants who've been before us. So it's really important for everyone to complement what they bring to the table. I think that's really, really critical.
Yeah. Just to build on what Liz is talking about, aside from the people you surround yourself with, what you read on social media. I'll give an example of Instagram. If you're constantly, listening to people who trash talk women, you will start trash talking women. If you constantly listen to people who are always complaining about, taxes this, taxes that. I mean, yes, there is a place for that, but also listen to the voices of people who are offering solutions, right? So social media, the books you read. I read a lot of books, and I'm always posting them. And then people are always asking, why do you read such serious books? Why don't you read more comical books? But I know what it is I'm doing, because I look out for authors who share their personal stories, whether male or female, and what it is I can learn from that so that I can build even more, from where I am. I never used to speak in front of people at all, whether in the office, whether at home, family functions. For the past 8 years, when I was at the Nation Media Group, I would come in, sit at the back, do my work and go home. And I thought that is what would end up giving me, elevation and get promoted. But it doesn't work like that. There's office politics, there's networking, and that's where your voice comes in. So now when I joined the Association of Media Women in Kenya, and they had these training opportunities where you get to, interact with women who are public speakers, women who are, leading different types of changes in the organizations, I realized, so I can speak. So there are women who speak, because if you look at mainstream media, sometimes you can think it's only men who speak. And yet there are women out here doing an amazing job. So the books you read, social media, the music you listen to, is it uplifting or does it make you feel more depressed?
Yeah.
Right? So what you read, you become. What you feed yourself, you become.
Yeah, and I think speaking on, what you just said, the media and the coverage in media, and how, because actually as we were talking, I was trying to think about even when, let's say, for example, during COVID, when they're making, public service announcements, so to speak, what are the voices that we're hearing, what are the faces that we're seeing, right? So there's clearly disparity in media coverage around, especially, I guess, in healthcare, and you don't see a lot of women, and there's a lot of power in representation. Sometimes when you see yourself in an individual, that sense of resonance, you're like, oh, okay, I can become that, right?
Exactly.
And so what, I guess, can we do? And for those who are listening or watching who maybe do have those positions where they can influence change in that aspect, what's at stake if we continue with the way things are, I guess, on one end? But what are some of the steps we can take towards a future where that disparity doesn't exist?
What happens if we don't do anything? The status quo remains, and we continue having these conversations
over and over
again. There was this interesting report by the Global Media Reporting Project around, they wanted to measure how women are featured as key opinion leaders or analysts on different media platforms. And in I think it was done between 1995 and 2015, and it was 17%. And in 2015, guess the percentage rise or decline. Want to guess? You know.
I knew you were going to do that.
What was the...
It was about just measuring how many women show up in media.
What was the increase?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, negligible. It's moved from 17 to 24, 25%.
Oh, wow.
And this is a span of, is that 25 years?
25 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's like you're rightfully saying, you can't be what you can't see. We need to continue profiling, amplifying the voices that are emerging, those that are established. We need to continue equipping women with this expertise to share them, to move beyond, the being afraid, the fear they have, and do it like Rachel says, do it while afraid, and practice makes progress. Again, I love saying that because I'm a Mandela Washington Fellow, and one of the things I was so privileged to meet Barack Obama, President Barack Obama. One of the things definite male ally. He kept saying is even the way he's a brilliant orator, but when he speaks, you can see it just didn't wake up. It's practice.
Yes.
It's really so much practice. And there are people you can listen to for days, not even 2 hours, for days, because they have a lot of things that they're saying that make sense, which goes back to me saying you have to be abreast of what's happening within your industries. You need to keep imbibing on knowledge, and then you disseminate that knowledge, not forgetting also we're in a period where there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation. Being able to decipher or filter through what is disinformation, what is misinformation. And I know during COVID, since you mentioned it, and being one of the people at the front lines, was how are we have experts speaking from different books, they're saying, and both are experts, they're doctors. And we went even a layer further. Just because you have the title doctor doesn't really warrant everything you're saying. Do you have publications? Are those publications peer-reviewed? How many people have peer-reviewed them, So you add layers and layers of verification. And I really love the work that Africa Check does, because I wish there was more Africa checks, just making sure, and it's not just on health, on a lot of information that is out there. I mean, if you Google today a headache, you would think you're dying tomorrow.
No.
Just because of the things that are written there of what it's a symptom of. So I think just all those components would really, really benefit folks.
Yeah, and I think she mentioned the Global Media Monitoring Project. And I think there was another one that was mentioned at a different panel, the media panel, that was trying to assess how, the number of women who are featured in the news. And they surveyed, I think, South Africa, Kenya, there's a North African country and a West African country. It was by Luba Kasova, I think. I think it's very important to keep on churning out these studies and particularly localizing them, because I think that is how media houses like the BBC have their 50-50 project, where news cannot be aired or published in whatever newspaper if the number of women doesn't tally the number of men.
That's
right?
Brilliant.
Yeah, and you can only, I guess, change your policy or start acting if you have numbers, if you have evidence to show you that this is where you're at and you're falling back behind in these, I think also having people who are willing to, be criticized, because a lot of the media in Kenya, a lot of the media owners are not open to criticism. So you can do your research as, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as whatever media partner, but your research won't be read, right? So the status quo, again, remains. Yeah. So there's space, actually, for people to have or people to choose people in leadership who are open to change. Yeah. And what I've realized in the media space, you having X number of years as in journalism does not make you a leader, right? And unfortunately, most of the people we call editors in our newsrooms who manage and choose what goes out at 9 p.m. or whatever are not leaders. And in terms of why we are here, this 3-day conference, we've been talking about visionary leadership. And visionary leadership is missing in the media space in Kenya, in East Africa. We had the gender desk, the head of the gender desk from the Nation Media Group. She is there because currently the executive editor of the Nation Media Group is a visionary woman leader. Sometimes you might think that, let's add more women to the table, right? Let's add more numbers of women in, political positions. But those women are at risk of continuing the patriarchal, biases or challenges, barriers, keeping women's faces out of the conversation. So I think there's also room for intentionality in either voting for leaders or selecting leaders or nominating leaders, so that you're not just picking people in the name of gender, but in the name of what they're bringing to the table in terms of leadership skills. Yeah.
And I think I love what you said there, because sometimes end up, and I've had conversations like this around gender and diversity. And I remember one particular conversation I was having with someone who was a champion of gender diversity and whatnot. She's the CEO of Aga Khan Foundation. And she told me, she said, Ben, actually, sometimes the gatekeepers are not men. They're fellow women.
Yeah.
And sometimes people who uphold patriarchy are not men. It's fellow women, right?
Yeah.
And it could be because of inherent bias, but I think sometimes it's because of the microaggression that exists. And, we've had conversations around being the only and how, do not be comfortable with being the only, right? Yeah. But I think sometimes the microaggression that's in the space cripples the woman who has a seat on the table.
Absolutely.
Now you know that if I don't truly have agency, and if I actually do anything here, I might be putting my position at risk here, right? So on one end, how can we create spaces where there's true inclusion, where there's safety for the only to open the door for others to come in, right? I think that's a conversation that we'll probably continue, we need to continue to have. And then on the other hand, I think the question that I want to ask is around authenticity. We hear this quite often, be yourself. But I think half the time when people say that, they don't really want to see your true self, right? It's just be enough of yourself that I can take and then keep the rest to yourself, right? And when we talk about representation and seeing yourself, and especially in the space, for example, like healthcare, where when people think about healthcare, there's an image that's in your mind that is an image that we have been fed and we've been seeing over and over and over again, right? And so to change that, when we talk about visibility, it means we have to not just communicate, expose certain images, but we have to be very diverse in how we do that. We were having a conversation earlier about your hair, right?
I feel like you need to explain to the audience how my hair looks like.
Her hair came up because I love it, but I have such a round face, and I wondered whether I would kill it in that hair.
But there are people who probably do not have the courage to do that because they feel like, oh my goodness, I have to look like how everyone else looks because if that will suddenly, so
like they want to blend in, not stand out.
Exactly. And so I think how do we create spaces where when we talk about inclusion, when we talk about diversity, and especially being visible, those who are being visible, we see all shades of women and what that looks like. And we're not just saying we want to see a certain kind of brand and this, but it's like, how do we create a space where anyone, however you choose to show up in this world, however you choose to present yourself in this world, you can see that example, you can see that representation in media.
I love that question very much because in our Women Lift Health leadership journey, we take different cohorts through a fully funded 12-month leadership journey. And there are 4 modules they go through, which is authentic, strategic, impactful, and inclusive leadership. And what we often tell people, we are, like you say, different shades, different forms, and people have different personalities, very different personalities. I think one of the most exciting things we've ever done is our teams went through this sort of Enneagram. It's called an Enneagram. I would encourage anyone to do an Enneagram because it really, and you have to answer it very honestly. Depending on what you put in, you get your results. And it really tells you what personality type you are. What are your key strengths? What are your weaknesses? What do you need to work on? What are your blind spots? What kind of personalities do you need to lean into? Or which ones complement. It also helps you if we knew all our, Enneagram test results. And you maybe came out a number 7, I'm a number 8, or a number 5 possibly. And it tells us this is how you relate with somebody who's a number 5. And because we're all very different personality types. The personality type that I am is somebody who, like, I don't have gray areas. It's black or white. I dish it as I see it. And oftentimes I remember growing up, my mom and my dad used to, like you were saying, there are people who sponsor who you are, and they influence that, and they've never made me change. They've never told me, I've never raised my hand and they told me, no, just, it's okay, you ask too many questions and all those things. I've always been a person who will ask questions. I want to know why am I doing this? Why should I go this way and not this way? And I remember a time somebody told me, if you ask too many questions here, you'll end up in trouble. And I'm like, it's okay. Because I will not be able to sleep until my conscience is clear. I want to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And not in a rude or aggressive way. It's from a point of, I want to understand. I think sometimes as humans, when we say show up authentically, we don't mean it. And for those who show up authentically as they are, they're judged. And for me, it's a simple example is I recall joining government and joining this institution, and I recall, the questions that young girls were always asked were not similar to what men were asked. Like girls will be asked, how many children do you have? Are you married? I have never sat in an interview where I've had a man being asked that ever. And it bugged me. And the day, like the switch flipped, is the day a lady came, she said she had 3 kids. I was quite young. I was like, I think 27 or 26 in a room where the next panelist is like 52, right? And I was the only female there. And the question that was asked was, how many kids do you have? She said 3. And when she left, one of the people in the room, laughed and said, you won't be surprised, all those are from 3 different men. And I was livid. I said, no, we cannot continue with this interview. And it was so bad that I escalated it to our HR. And when nothing was being done, because we know sometimes how power plays, like you're saying, power, authority, privilege, I escalated it to the ombudsman, because I was like, we can't do this. And a policy came out during that time, you cannot ask certain questions. And for me, that even if I spoke up and I was victimized, the fact that a policy was done and it paved the way for other people not to be subjected to such kind of line of questioning, for me, that was a win. So I feel that we should always be authentic to who we are. Because if we're not, I would never want to get to my deathbed and I'm replaying my life and I'm thinking, I should have said this, I should have done this, I should have questioned this. I think it's really, when we say show up in your true authentic self, show up in your authenticity, but also be cognizant of how your authenticity impacts and influences other people.
I want to take you back to the question, or was it a comment? You were talking about the microaggression that women at the top face. And I remember reading an interview that Pamela Setoni, the executive director of the Nation Media Group, gave. And she was saying it's very lonely at the top because there is no support, right? She'll be at the decision-making table. She'll be the only woman with 7 men. Yeah. So you can imagine when decisions are made, maybe she says, we want more women leaders at Nation Media Group. They might not go through because she's a lone ranger. And I think there's an opportunity there to support her. For example, external partners, because there are many, I don't know what executive editor translates to in other companies in the corporate world, but probably, I don't know, CEOs and things like that. There's an opportunity for media partners or even the advertisers, who work with the Nation or whatever other media house to come in and say, oh, wow, that's a leader we want to support. Let's draw her. Let's bring her into our circle of women in leadership. Let's take her through this journey, right? Because we realize that she might be having challenges that the rest of us who have already probably achieved a certain percentage of women at the table, Secondly, in terms of authenticity, I think it's very important to look inward as an individual. And even before you get to authentic leadership, are you authentic as a person, as an individual, in the space where you're in your room at night? Are you authentic? And for me, what has worked is therapy. because I get asked a lot of hard questions. When I started therapy, one of the questions I was asked was, who are you? I said, I'm a mom. I said, I'm a journalist. I said, I love
I would
singing.
probably say adrenaline junkie.
Yes, yes. But then she drew out those labels and said, so without those labels, tell me who you are, Rachel. Do you know who you are? And I didn't know who I was. I couldn't answer that question. That was 10 years ago. If you ask me that question now, I will answer it in a way that is separate from the titles or
responsibilities.
Yes. So I think knowing yourself, your weaknesses, accepting them. Yeah, it's a painful process, but knowing them, accepting them, and then asking, so how can I improve here? And doing that in a safe space. So doing it, not that you're doing it alone, but with people who will not judge you, with people who will understand that you are not perfect. You're not intending to be perfect, but you just want to learn more about yourself so that you can, be present in spaces as an authentic person who has improved themselves in a way that others can follow. Yeah.
I love that. I think there's a Japanese philosophy called Wabisabi. And basically, the Japanese, as we all know, they love pottery. And so when, say, you have a vase and then it breaks, what happens, right? You can throw it away or you can put it back together. And then when you put it back together, you can make sure that the cracks are not seen. You paint it seamlessly so that it all looks like part of the whole. But what they do is they would, in those places where it cracked and it broke, they basically paint something that resembles gold, right? So you can see exactly where it broke. And so Wabisabi technically is about embracing brokenness and not hiding it, but using it as a core part of who you are and what makes you beautiful and what makes you who you are, right? So I really love what you said there. Now, as we're wrapping up our conversation, there's a question that we ask pretty much all of our guests, right? It's called the 1-1-1. What is the one book that
Sounds
you read?
tricky.
I know.
What is the one book that you read in your life at some point that if there was a time machine and you were able to go back in time, you would take that book with you? What is the one habit that you've developed later in life that you say, I wish I had started this earlier? And what is the one personal value that you will not compromise no matter the cost?
Do you want me to go first?
Okay, sure.
This book is always on my mind.
Yeah.
For some unknown reason. It's called Left to Tell. I can't remember the name of the author, and probably because it's difficult for me to pronounce as a Kenyan, but the author is Rwandese. And she was sharing her story as a survivor of the genocide. And at the time, I think I was about 25, it was so mind-boggling and, I don't know, shocking that you would go through things such as, rape. You would go through things that society, the media now doesn't talk about, and yet they affect women. And here is this author laying her heart bare and telling the world, this is what happened to me. And I'm not gonna keep quiet about it. I want the whole world to know. I want my story to be, in the books of history. I want to leave a mark. Yeah. And I think that's where my journey of introspection began. I didn't do anything about it after reading the book, but when you look back and you try to join the dots, I can see where it started from. Your second question was?
A habit.
Habit. Me time. I never knew what that was. And I think that applies to many women in the newsroom because, for example, your phone is supposed to be, you're supposed to be available on phone 24/7. When your editor calls you at midnight, there's breaking news, you need to be available. But right now, there's something I call me time, and it's boundaries. So I am a mom, I love my children, but my me time is my me time. So I'll either sometimes go to Airbnb for a staycation or, go for holiday somewhere, or even sometimes just lock myself in my room and tell the nanny, I need some time just to be alone. Please take care of the children. And It is because you cannot give from an empty cup, right? When you're exhausted, when your mind is so full, when you've given, and you feel like you don't have any more to give, you need to fill your cup, and it's only you who can do that. So you need to put aside time to fill your cup. Yeah. And that filling of the cup may be reading, maybe sleeping, listening to music, whatever it is, writing in your journal, whatever it is, but fill your cup. The last question was?
Personal value.
Personal value. Truth. And that's why at the beginning when we were speaking and I told you I value eye contact. I could be wrong, but people who look you in the eye, it's very difficult for them to lie to you. And even when they're lying, your psyche, exactly. Body language. Yeah. So truth for me is very important because it tells me about who you are as a person. The energy that Lizz was talking about. I can tell your energy by how you look at me or don't look at me. Yeah.
Awesome. That's wonderful. For me, the book that I've been trying to think as Rachel was talking, and the book that keeps coming because I've read it I'm one of those people who can watch a movie
over and over?
Yes,
several times?
Even 50 times if
God.
I love it. So this book, I have read it multiple times, and I don't give away my books. I would rather gift you a book because I'm always with a pink highlighter, yellow highlighter.
So it has graffiti all over.
everywhere, because I want to reference something. I think 48 Laws of Power. I really
Green,
love,
right?
yes, Robert Greene. I love that book. I have read it over and over and over and over again. It never gets old because it reminds me the things you forget. Then I go back and I'm like, yeah, I'm back. Yeah. So 48 Laws of Power.
The Habit.
Habits that I would...
That you wish you had started earlier.
That I wish I started earlier.
And then personal value, that you will not compromise no matter the cost.
Habit that I wish I started earlier. I think this one I'm struggling with. Because I'm still struggling with it. Yeah. Which is sleep. I don't sleep enough. I think that's my biggest struggle. And I wish, I don't know if there are books to read. Yeah, I rarely do. And I think it's because because of reading a lot, so I come across so many quotes. And there's this quote that says, sleep is the cousin of death. Not that I'm afraid of dying. But I always imagine I'm getting so many things done. Maybe I need to hang out with Rachel more. My me time should be sleeping, and I get to embrace that. So that habit, I wish I could learn it better. So I'm still working on that. I should be sleeping more. I need to rest more. And personal value I cannot compromise is justice. I will always speak up and speak about issues that I'm passionate about, irrespective of the repercussions.
Wow. Beautifully said. I'm with you on the sleep. Actually, that's my only New Year resolution is to sleep. And I've done everything. I've tried everything there is to try. And then I came to realize there is something I fundamentally believe about sleep that needs to change. And it's the journey of changing that. And I think my time is limited. I'm so much more productive when I'm awake. Yeah. Like all of those things are things that I somewhere along the journey of my life I picked up, and I'm struggling to let go of that belief. But hopefully you get there, and I hope I get there as well.
Yeah. And also because I get a lot of sleep paralysis when this whole sleep, maybe I should get a sleep therapist. Yeah, for real.
So we've come to the end of our conversation. Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you, Lizz. And this has been an awesome conversation. I learned a lot. I've been inspired and challenged by the stories and the insights that you have shared. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too. Learned so much from
Enjoy
you.
the conversation.
It's not the wasabi. You said the
Wabisabi.
Wabisabi.
Yeah. And to our dear listeners and those who are watching, this has been the Why Lead podcast. I'm your host, Ben Owden.